I'd like to cope for Yang with a brief interlude in between parts 1 and 2. Basically, explaining one of the strengths that Aaron and I both have developed through this experience. I can't forget to mention, my dad, Staff Sergeant Bernard William Khrushchev, United States Army Vietnam War vet, taught me the value of laughing it off to live it off, taught me the value of art, taught me the value of music, and taught me the value of self-expression, which the humans have done their best to repress ever since. Yet my son and I have a bit of a knack for it. And through my anger, rather than focusing on how I may destroy my enemy, which is a dumbass endeavor, I put my thoughts into lyrics. Now, I'm not a rapper. I'm from small town Wisconsin. I'm not a rapper. But I'm going to try. Because I can't afford licensing for certain songs that I would create and perform parodies thereof. So here's rolling, and then I'll continue. Oh, I shy. Okay, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. Oh, hey, why won't you see the cracker raping me? Took me slave at knife point to conceive him a baby, whose small frame and bright mind through the 5-year-long fight learned to abuse. No one watched while he gallantly beat me, and the slave's silent glare, while reports hit dead air, gave proof through the years that slavery's still there. Oh, why does that blood-stained rag fly, torn and battered, o'er the land of slavery and home of crime families? One must do what one must in order to truly express the crisis in society that we as a society refuse to face. That's why my son and I are going to Canada as soon as we legally and possibly can, because with the laws and policies set forth here in the United States of slavery and rape, we don't have the right to exist. And I will expound upon that further in my next pieces here, part 2 and 3, and on my expose on my Twitter and Patreon. And one more through abuse and neglect, because he was so proudly my dad's son. Mitchell loved my dad. He loved his dad. He was crushed and broken when he was 5 years old. He saw my dad's murdered body. He came up to my room to tell me, Sherilyn, Daddy shot himself in the eye. Like 0.0% of suicides shoot themselves in the eye. They don't do it. But this is the law of slavery and how it's enforced. I gotta get back to Colorado. My son still has his slave name. Vincent Stetzer is infiltrating my son's name. The only reason I didn't kill myself after a lifetime of being a slave is because of my son. And he still has a slave name because Jennifer Torrington likes it that way. She said at the beginning of the hearing that the district court is completely unable, her hands are tied, for taking my rapist out of my son's life, for ending the visitation, for ending the parental rights. The district court's hands are tied, allegedly. So that's why Aaron's name and the school have been on and off that restraining order since February, because the district court can't include him, and they know that. If you're going to lie to someone, don't be stupid. Don't make it obvious that you're lying. And then don't make it obvious throughout the entire proceedings. Every time I mention the complete, all-encompassing abuse that we endured, I'm not allowed to speak. I'm cut off. And my owner, my rapist, Thomas Stetzer, gets asked another question, which I wasn't able to rebut anything he said. I wasn't able to counter any of his lies. I wasn't able to say anything to or about anything that he falsely claimed. When Thomas Stetzer claimed that the only time he used talking parents was to ask for visitation, I wasn't allowed to say that that was after he cut off my son's Medicaid by fraudulently changing his birth date in their records. I wasn't allowed to say that these messages over talking parents were sent at bar time by a man who allegedly doesn't drink, even though his old bank statements, which, oh yeah, I wasn't able to submit, show that he'd been to liquor stores. Right after Operation Freedom, he was going to liquor stores and spending 30, 40, 50 bucks. That's a lot of booze, Jack. That's a lot of Jack. Wasn't allowed to mention any of that. Nothing doing. Not allowed to mention that when Thomas and Aaron went to the park, that I was almost never allowed to go. That the loving family video he showed over his phone, which, by the way, I was told that phone evidence can't be submitted, but he was allowed to. I was told that I had to have everything submitted on a thumb drive and bring my laptop and plug it in and show the evidence. That's what I did. I did what I was told I had to do. Thomas is like, I got some stuff on my phone. And she's like, oh, can you guys squeeze in real close and we'll show you the video? I smelt like Thomas's man funk when I left court. That's how close we were. That's all fine. Thomas was allowed to break the law many, many times. He was allowed to talk about breaking the law many, many times. I exposed his criminal hustle. I exposed what little I could. And Judge Torrington at the end, after saying in the beginning that her hands are allegedly tied with protecting my son and his school because district court can't do that. That's why they'd been doing it for the duration of the Aaron's name and the school's name have been off and on there, depending on what judge I get to talk to. So don't tell me that district court can't protect a child in a school, because they obviously can't. Other judges, when you're not in your chamber, have recognized the clear and present danger. I wasn't allowed to talk about, I tried, but I was barely allowed to mention how Aaron's Medicaid was sabotaged immediately after and because Thomas was turned away from central visitation because, another thing I wasn't allowed to mention, only 3 of the tidal wave of witnesses I sent to him were needed to clearly, beyond any doubt, demonstrate to the central visitation that my rapist is dangerous to my son, to his well-being physically and mentally, that he needs additional therapy to cope with feelings that his dad brings up. Not allowed to mention any of that. Thomas Stetzer has been told to go down to the pro se room, which I was kept out of for that reason, to get a list of all the supervised visitation venues in Denver County. And that he's supposed to submit that list to me, and that we're supposed to jointly pick one and go with it, and give Thomas 2 hours a week to see my son. That'll be 2 one-hour visits after school. That's 2 days a week where I don't get to see my son, other than taking him from school to visitation and then home. Right before bed, when my son's going to be terribly disturbed from the events that transpired with my rapist. Another thing I wasn't allowed to mention is how Aaron is afraid of him. He's terrified of him. I have to uncoach him. Aaron and I are going down the hallway at home, and he sees something that's messy, he sees something that's broken, he sees garbage left discarded. First thing and only thing out of his mouth: bad guy daddy was here, I need to fight him and hurt him and keep you and Moo Kitty safe. And he gets angry and defensive and he puffs up. And I have to calm him down and tell him, sweetheart, it's not your job to fight him. I need to fight him in court with words and show and prove to the judge that he's not safe and that we're doing so much better now with Operation Freedom than we ever were in our whole lives before this. I did get to show the court that Aaron's grown more than 2 inches in the less than a year since Operation Freedom, because his diet changed. He's not on protein shakes and milk anymore. I was barely allowed to mention a little bit of that. I wasn't allowed to say anything about how Aaron couldn't talk until he was 4. He had like a couple of words and phrases, like next show, gimme toy, a Donald's. He had a couple of words and phrases. Now, he speaks in full-on conversations. Now, he's potty trained. I wasn't allowed to mention how Thomas beat the shit out of my son to keep him afraid of going to the bathroom. For 2 years. I wasn't allowed to say anything about that. I wasn't allowed to say anything about how Aaron's diapers were coming in from Medicaid after his 4th birthday, because after the age of 4, it's diagnosed as incontinence. It's a medical condition that Aaron has been trained to not control his bladder and his bowels and just let loose wherever he's at. He was trained. He was beaten. He was made afraid of the bathroom. He was screamed at. He was dragged away. He was hit. He was smacked. He was pushed. He was brutalized with regards to the bathroom for 2 entire years. Not allowed to mention that. Not allowed to mention that Aaron had incident reports where he was fighting with kids and severely injured them. I received incident reports 2 or 3 times a week before Operation Freedom. If Aaron wasn't in preschool, he would have been expelled. If he was in kindergarten, they would have kicked him out of school because he fought so much. He's 3. He was 3 last year. This year, because of Operation Freedom, there might be an incident report every other month. Like, not even one a month. Probably every other month. And it involves another child injuring my son. It's not Aaron beating on his friends, his colleagues. It's not my son being a bully anymore. He's not a Stetzer anymore. Get rid of his slave name. He's not a Stetzer anymore. My son is a Kirchhoff. He's a good boy. He's a smart boy. He devised the tactic to put a can of tomato sauce on the toilet paper roll to maintain the tension so he can cut the toilet paper with the karate chop. He devised that all on his own at 4.5. My son thought of that. To maintain tension on the toilet paper roll, a can of tomato sauce is perfect. My son came up with that, and he proudly, he took me by the hand. Mommy, I show you. He took me to the bathroom to show me. See, Mommy, I do haya. See, Mommy, I got the tomato. I do haya. He was so proud of himself, and understandably so. My son, at the age of 4.5, was a
personal hygiene engineer. I gotta come up with a name for this, because who comes up with a way to perfectly keep tension on a roll of toilet paper so you can karate chop it? Who comes up with that? My 4.5-year-old Kirchhoff son, the grandson of Bernard William Kirchhoff, Staff Sergeant, United States Army back in Vietnam. That's my son's grandfather. That's who my son needs to be named after. Aaron Bernard Harold, after my great-grandfather Kirchhoff. That's who my son is. He is no longer, because of Operation Freedom, and only because of Operation Freedom, Thomas Stetzer's not in our home. And that is the only thing that has allowed my son to no longer be Aaron Vincent Bernard Stetzer. With Bernard, my dad's name is barely a tag on my son's middle name. Not legally recognizable, just something I throw in for grandeur. My son is Aaron Bernard Harold, one word, can't get up, Kirchhoff. That's who my son is. That's who thought to put a can of tomato sauce on the toilet paper roll. That's my son, who creates boats and cars and houses out of magnet tiles and Legos. That's my son, who created a door on his desk that I got him from Precious Child, because I wasn't allowed to go to resources for 5 years, and now I can. He put a cardboard box on the back of his desk so that he has a fort door to swing open and crawl through. He took the box out of the recycle and stacked it up next to his desk, and then he was mad because the cardboard would instead of swing because it wasn't attached to the desk. I Gorilla taped the sucker to the desk. It's now hinged. It swings. It's his door. He loves it. My son thought of that. He wasn't even 4 yet. It was right before his birthday he thought of that. That's my son. That's Aaron Bernard Harold Kirchhoff. That's my son. That's not Thomas Stetzer's slave. That's not my rapist slave, Aaron Vincent Bernard Stetzer. That's not who he is anymore. I wasn't allowed to discuss how my son's a completely unrecognizably different little boy. Now, finally, because he can be. I wasn't allowed to mention how my son's not afraid anymore. He's not afraid of the dark in his room, in his home, where he knows he's safe. He's not afraid of the dark. Take him outside, he's petrified. Still, because Thomas forced his bedroom light to stay open all night, every night. He taught my son to not be comfortable, to be afraid of the dark. He taught him that. He taught him monsters. I'm trying to unteach him monsters. He taught him about bad guys because he is one. Thomas said in court, not yesterday, but in June, that my son, who was barely talking at that point, had a couple of words and phrases, called him a criminal. That's quite a lot of credit to give me to teach him that word. He said that I trained Aaron to think of him as a criminal. Aaron's word for my rapist is bad guy daddy. Bad guy daddy's mean. Bad guy daddy hurt us. Bad guy daddy's not safe. Bad guy daddy, I need to fight him. I need to keep you and Moo Kitty safe from bad guy daddy. I need to fight bad guy daddy. I need to give bad guy daddy a boo-boo and owie. I need to hurt him. That's what my son thinks of my rapist. I didn't teach him that shit. I'm not teaching a 4-year-old nothing to fight a 57-year-old grown man who's been preying on disabled women since 1979. Not allowed to mention that. I tried to mention the lady in La Crosse who Thomas and his alleged twin brother claimed to have murdered in 1983. I was barely able to mention that. Now, I have no reason to care about what happened in La Crosse, Wisconsin in 1982 and 1983. There's way too much going on in my life to be looking up stuff like that. The only reason I know about it is because my owner claimed to leave me dead like he killed her. A good thing she's alive and well. Leave me dead like a live woman anytime you want, Hockey. I don't know, man. Not allowed to discuss any of that. Not allowed to discuss the list of disabled women he preyed on. The blind lady, the lady in the wheelchair, the lady with the broken hip and seizures, who needed her family to escape his ownership. Thank God she had a support system. He didn't mention, I wasn't allowed to mention, the emancipated 15-year-old girl who was getting a divorce from the dude she married when she was 14. I wasn't allowed to mention the hypochondriac who thought she was disabled. I wasn't allowed to mention anyone. I wasn't allowed to mention that my dad guarded over him in Dodge County Correctional Prison, medium security. I wasn't allowed to mention that. I wasn't allowed to mention that my son is in stark raving terror of my rapist and is driven to fight him and hurt him, despite me telling him over and over every time he says that mommy has to fight bad guy daddy with words in court to convince the judge that we're only safe because of Operation Freedom. That's what I tell him every time. And it's a lie, because Jennifer Torrington wants Aaron Bernard Harold Kirchhoff to be Aaron Vincent Bernard Stetzer, slave of Thomas Stetzer. She wants him to be property of someone who she even said I managed to prove that this man is abusive towards myself and my cat. I'm a grown-ass woman who's allegedly not disabled, despite the list of diagnoses I was able to provide. I'm not disabled. I can work full-time. I was given income credit in divorce court for having a full-time minimum wage job. And so that balanced with Thomas's full-time minimum wage job. Oh yeah, he's a flagger again, despite making the false workman's comp claim that he was terrified of the traffic. I'm the one who's terrified of the traffic. He tried to get me to be a flagger. He took me to Flaggers Inc. for certification. I told him I can't stand for more than an hour. They sent me home. I had to take the bus. It was Thomas's day off, and he would come back and get me because I failed to get a job, the easiest job in the world. I failed to get, according to my owner and rapist, who, even though I was severely repressed in court, I was still able to prove to this ignorant woman that he abused me and my cat. But he's perfectly safe and loving and wonderful towards my son. He should have never gotten to meet my son. When do rapists get awarded visitation? She's talking about 2 hours a week of supervised visitation, and then we'll move on as quickly as possible to unsupervised visitation. That's when I'm dead and my son is abducted. Thomas Stetzer, my rapist, my owner, is allowed to have his knives. He's allowed to keep his grandfather's name attached to my son. He's allowed to have supervised visits because even though central visitation knows that he's completely dangerous and harmful to my son's physical and mental well-being, I'll just go find another visitation place that's capable of handling it. I'll just keep sending them the same witnesses I sent to central visitation. I'll just keep sending the tidal wave until I knock out every single visitation place in the state of Colorado. But since my owner and rapist has been awarded visitation, and he's been awarded all this and that, and he's been awarded the right to keep his grandfather's name attached to my son, even though I, according to Judge Torrington, proved that he abused myself and my cat, he's allowed to keep his knives. He's allowed to keep his grandfather's name on my son. We have culture night at school tonight, and I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but Aaron and I are first generation freed slaves, and I cited yesterday, the 12th of December 2019, even though my son is still the slave of my rapist and owner, fully and legally, because Jennifer Torrington said at first that her hands are tied and she can't do anything to eliminate his visitation and parental rights. I have to go to juvenile court. She said that at the beginning. And at the end, when Thomas Stetzer's like, oh, so Aaron's name is off the restraining order and the school's off the restraining order, that means I can go to school and take him home, right? She left the room. Didn't even say anything, left the room. When I argued that Thomas had already made the plot to abduct Aaron from school, not allowed to discuss that. I'm not going to change my ruling, Miss Stetzer. Wait, I thought it was a Kirchhoff by now. Wait. Jennifer Torrington used and abused her position as a Denver District Court judge to enforce rape and slavery on the disabled and our children as the law of the land. And as long as her ruling stands, I can't take my son on vacation to Montana or Arizona, let alone take my son to Canada. I can't get passports. I can't cross the Colorado border. If I move anywhere in Colorado, I have to prove that I can provide transportation for my son, because even though my rapist owner's van is moving just fine, it's never been immobilized, I wasn't able to discuss that either. So many times, constantly throughout the hearing, I was repressed, and my evidence was repressed. Evidence that I submitted to Gillian Cooley Morrison, who changed her mind about her decision after she filed a report. Every bit of evidence I sent her, she repressed. And so the judge won't look at that evidence, because I already sent it to Gillian Cooley Morrison, the child family investigator, and she repressed it. And Jennifer Torrington's okay with that. She has used and abused her position as a Denver County Circuit Court judge to enforce the laws of slavery and rape upon myself and my almost 5-year-old son, who's the product of this rape and slavery. He should have been protected from the get-go from my owner. But that never happened, because nobody investigates rape. No one investigates slavery. No one investigates captivity. No one investigates anything. No one investigates human rights violations every day, all day. Nobody cares. In the states of Colorado and Wisconsin, slavery and rape are the laws of the land. But you don't just have to listen to my word for it. because I documented that. Gross violation of our rights. I documented the enforcement of slavery and rape as laws of the land. I documented it. And I will release that documentation on my Patreon account because I am fighting the Civil War. It's 2019 and the laws of slavery and rape have been far from abolished. They've been expanded. In this day and age where my neighbors, 2 of them, in this building, are allowed to attempt to murder myself and my son because I'm a cripple white bitch and he's a white baby. Attempted murder is okay because those 2 women, is when authorities eventually belatedly became involved. Those women made the false claim that I used the N-word. I hate that fucking word, obviously. My son and I have been such our entire lives. And even though I've listed yesterday as the day we were granted our freedom from slavery, we were clearly not. We were forced into slavery more harshly than we'd experienced it in this past year since Operation Freedom. I am now at my owner's beck and call to go to visitation 2 nights after school with my son, who I won't get to see except for commute time that day, those days, 2 days a week, so that my rapist can enforce his presence on my son's life and prove that I can't keep my baby safe from my attacker. Thomas Stetzer, alleged 3rd-generation outlaw biker slave-owning bastard, is allowed to be my owner. He's allowed to be my son's owner. And because of that, I can't leave the area. I need to be within reach of my owner, rapist, beck and call. And if you don't believe that these horrors, that this freak show, that this Judge Torrington, Jennifer Torrington, can delightedly, happily enforce the laws of rape and slavery upon me because I'm disabled, and put in the financial calculation that I'm working full-time minimum wage even though I can't work. I'm trying to get graphics and jewelry together. Despite team arthritis, I can't make... I can sit at my table for like a half hour putting together earrings before I can't. I can't be outside of my owner's reach. His van, which was never immobilized, is legally disabled. Can't move because the transmission. He drove that thing to court. He drives that thing to work all over the state of Colorado. He drives that thing to his new apartment. The only consolation in yesterday was that I'm a Kirchhoff. My son isn't, but I'm a Kirchhoff. So anytime I go anywhere, I have to have my son's birth certificate and my marriage license and my dissolution of marriage papers to prove that I'm even my son's mother. He came from me. He slipped through ovaries that were covered in cysts at one point. The cysts are gone from my ovaries.